In this lesson, we're going to learn the roll tool and the ripple tool, a great way to really fine-tune your edit points. Now, the first thing I want you to look at is go over to the tool palette, and there's actually two elements that you can use, the roll tool and the ripple tool. And to remember their icon, the roll tool looks like two canisters of film on top of each other, and the ripple tool looks like a single canister of film unrolling. Now, the roll tool you'll use a lot when editing in Final Cut Pro, and the keyboard shortcut for that is the R key, which is easy to remember because that's what you use the most, and roll is only a 4-letter word. The ripple tool you'll use a little less frequently, and that keyboard shortcut is RR, and it's a longer word. We're going to use the roll tool to get started. Now let's take a look at what the roll tool actually does. I'm going to switch over to my selection tool just for a second. If I wanted to end this clip over here when the narrator pauses, I could go over here and make this clip shorter and go over here and make this clip longer. And yes, you could do this, but if you do this over and over and over again, day after day, it can get very cumbersome and time-consuming. Let's go ahead and undo that with 2 steps. I simply hit the R key to switch to the roll tool, and now when I click on it and I drag to the left, I'm actually moving the out point of the first clip and the in point of the second clip all at once. As a matter of fact, if you look in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, which was the canvas window, I actually see the last frame of the first shot and its timecode, and the first frame of the following shot and its timecode. So not only can I be precise as I look at my timeline, I can see the exact frame that I'm cutting out of and the frame that I'm cutting into. So obviously you can move an edit point with your mouse, but you can also do it numerically and with the keyboard. If I want to do it with the keyboard, I can use the same keyboard shortcuts that we learned earlier, which is the greater than and less than arrow keys, which you find above the period and the comma on your keyboard. This allows me to roll the edit one frame at a time, and I can be very precise. The only downside of this is I don't get that visual reinforcement in my canvas of seeing the last frame of the first clip and the first frame of the second clip. I can also do this numerically. So if I have this edit point selected, I can simply type in a duration that I want it to move. So if I want the edit to happen a little bit earlier, say 5 seconds, I simply hit 5, you see it opens up the roll text box, and I hit return. Now let's look at a variation on the roll edit. I'm going to switch back to my selection tool. It's always good practice when you're not using a tool to immediately hit the A key and switch back to your selection tool. As I'm looking at my timeline, I can see exactly where the narrator pauses between this phrase and this phrase. So instead of going to the roll tool, selecting it, clicking on it, and dragging it over, there's another great shortcut that I can use. It's called the extend edit. Once again, all I need to do is position my playhead exactly where I want the cut to be. I then select the edit point that I want to move, and I hit the E key for extend edit. And as you see, it immediately moves the edit to the exact point I want it to be. Extend Edit is one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts because it really cuts down on my edit time and puts my edits precisely where I want them. Now let's take a look at ripple edits. Now ripple edits are a little tougher to get your head around because whereas the roll edit only affects 2 clips, the out point and the in point of the previous and the following clip, when you do a ripple edit, it actually affects the duration of your timeline and everything that happens later in your timeline. We're going to go towards the end of the timeline so you can see how this works. The clip we're going to work on is the Boy on Rock clip, and I'm going to switch over to my ripple tool by clicking on the R key twice. So RR, and now I'm in my ripple tool. Let's load this clip into the viewer, and to load a clip into the viewer, I simply am double clicking on it, and as you can see in the viewer, I see the clip that's in my timeline, I see what the in point is and what the out point is, and here's something else to take note of. I know I'm working with the clip from my timeline because I see little sprocket marks in the scrubber bar. And we'll look at this a little bit more in later lessons. But for now, let's take a look at how the ripple works. So if I hover my mouse over that clip, you notice that the icon's a little different. As I said, it looks like a spool of film unrolling, and it has a tail. And whichever way that tail is pointing is the side of the clip that we're affecting. So if I was actually between 2 clips, as I move between the edit points, the side that the tail is pointing to indicates which clip I'm going to be working on. We're going to go over here and work on the Boy on Rock, and what I want you to note is when I click on it and drag it, it looks like it's getting shorter from both sides, but what I'm really doing is as I trim off the front end of the clip, everything further down this timeline slides to the left to fill the gap that I would have been creating. So when I let go of this, take a look at what happens in the timeline, but also take a look in the viewer window. You'll notice that the in point moves over to the right, but the out point doesn't move at all. So two things are happening here, and I'll undo and redo this so you can look at both the viewer window and also what's happening in the back half of the timeline. Did you notice the in point now moved from this location here to this location here? And also, as this slid to the left, the woman and baby shot also slid to the left. Let me undo that and redo that and take a look at both those areas. Undo, you see in the viewer, the in point moves to the left, and in the timeline, the woman and baby shot has now moved back to the right. When I redo that, Shift-Command-Z, we see the reverse happen. My in point will move to the right, and the woman and baby will slide to the left as the boy on rock clip gets shorter. Just like with the roll tool, you can use keyboard shortcuts with the ripple tool. So if I have an edit selected and I grab my greater than and less than bracket keys, I can start trimming a frame at a time. And this is really a good way to see what's happening. If you notice, you can see the woman shot moving to the left, and you can see the front end trimming from the boy on the rock. And then I simply go back and hit play and see if I like my timing.
And cultures as unpredictable as the landscape.
You can also do this numerically. Once again, with this selected, I can say I want to trim off 5 seconds. I simply hit +5. Now take a look at the text box. It doesn't say roll anymore. It says ripple. So it knows, and it's telling me that we're doing a ripple edit. I hit return, trims off 5 frames from the head of the clip, and we're good to go. So to sum it up, ripple and roll, two very valuable editing tools to fine-tune what's happening at edit points. The roll does not affect the duration of your show, it just moves the edit point between two clips. The ripple, though extremely valuable, is a little more dangerous because it could affect what's happening downstream. So when performing ripple edits, take a look at what's happening after that edit to make sure you're not changing the way your program looks.